Okay, welcome very, very much to Conversations. A pleasure and an honor to welcome to the program a major intellectual, I'd like to say. It's John Tepper Marlin, Ph.D., and he's here as a guest. We're going to be talking about his life's career and his take upon the human condition from a very large, well-educated understanding of the human condition. And John, welcome very much to Conversations. That's a true fact, yeah. And it's good to see you. And welcome very much.
Thank you.
Share with us your background, please, if you would. Born and raised, a little bit, education, and then let's talk some about the human condition with a particular emphasis, perhaps, upon the economic situation. We could bring in, we've entered, apparently, the presidential election season. We could talk some about the political implications of the economic order. But could you share your own background, please?
Sure. I grew up, my dad worked for the UN, so I worked in, he worked in Montreal and Geneva. So I grew up going to school in Washington, in Montreal, in Ireland, and England.
With him, yeah, that's good. That
right.
was good background, yeah.
Well, certainly multicultural.
That's good, I think, don't you?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I did my undergraduate degree at Harvard and graduated at 62, and then went to Oxford and got my BA and MA there. And,
that's interesting. Were you, as an undergraduate, or were you studying broadly, or were you focusing?
I did history and literature. You know, I started out in the classics in Latin and Greek.
Okay, that's a good grounding.
And then I felt that I was missing out on what my contemporaries were learning, and I decided to switch to economics. And I did,
as an undergraduate,
as an undergraduate.
Okay.
And then I went to did philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford. I just went back there for my 49th reunion.
Congratulations.
Of matriculation.
At Oxford?
At Oxford,
yeah.
I just came.
How long were you at Oxford?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
What a wonderful place to be.
Great experience.
That would have been in the mid-60s, or
62 to 64.
What a wonderful place to be. That's a major seat of learning.
Well, it's just it's a great privilege for Americans to be able to go there.
Goes way back as a university. I think Bologna maybe is the first university in Europe. I'm not sure, but Oxford's right way back there. Yeah.
And then I went work in Washington for the Federal Reserve Board. I was their African expert because I spoke French, and as well as knowing some economics. And I got my Ph.D. While I was working for the federal government at George Washington University. And I worked for the FDIC and SBN. Came up here to Baruch College to teach finance.
On 23rd Street?
23rd Street.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, okay. Was Mr. Baumel there? No.
Baumel is at NYU.
He's at Stern, I think.
Yeah. NYU, and he also teaches at Princeton. In fact, I'm using his textbook. I'm teaching an economics course for government officials in Westchester at Pace.
Okay.
And I'm using his textbook.
Well, you were studying, you said you even began to pick it up as an undergraduate even, you know, the idea of economics rather than the classics. You were still undergraduate in that. But then you went into it. So you've read economics in a very serious way, the canon, as they say.
I was put through the mill, yes.
Yeah. And it used to be, if I'm not mistaken, in the 19th century, they used to call it political economy. They linked at the hip politics and economics, which seems to me is a pretty good idea because they do mutually inform one another, don't they, mightily?
Well, the original idea behind economics, if you go to Adam Smith, was to advise government officials on how to run their country. He was concerned that they were too focused on raising treasure for the king.
Yeah.
And he said, so the whole point was the wealth of the country is not what the king owns. It's the wealth is what is the people and their skills and what they can produce.
Yeah, and they had three things going on in that year that it was published, The Wealth of Nations, 1776, a major milestone in human history. We had Mr. Smith's publishing Wealth of Nations. You had the invention up in Scotland again. He was from a Scottish background, of the steam engine, heralding an industrial revolution. And you had a bunch of colonists across the Atlantic Ocean saying, we want to be independent from the feudal claims to legitimacy historically that it held for 1,000 years after Rome, where you were able to pick up on your early classical training.
Right. There are only a few economic books that that made a wide impact on the world, I think. One of them is The Wealth of Nations, the other is The General Theory.
That's Mr. Keynes.
Yeah, Mr. Keynes.
Well, that would be good for us to talk about. That he published that book. It's the beginning of what we would call economics. It seems to me in the modern sense. We had assize courts and the different kinds of systems that had served the feudal order, and that feudal order with the dynastic states that held, as I just had hinted at, 1,000 years or so after the Roman Empire, and that had been what was considered to be political and economic legitimately was vested in the royal houses, feudal order, and there was a new age dawning, and he was the one who laid some sort of claim to that or understood the evolution of the zeitgeist or something. Yeah. So for that reason, it's important, and it remains so.
Yes.
And his is a good grounding for all people that would be interested in that, including our political leadership, to be informed of the economics. We do have, if I may, veer off a little bit, if you were to say you're interested in psychology or psychiatry, the operation of the human brain and how it works and that kind of thing, a big subject, you could be a person who would be having that title, and you could be very, very different if you were one who followed behavioralism and B.F. Skinner than if you followed Carl Rogers.
Right.
And big difference. It really makes it a whole difference in terms of that.
Economists do lots of different things.
Yes. Okay.
I remember there were, I think Heilbronner group.
Robert Heilbronner, beautiful guy. Yeah.
I miss him. He described the up and down economist, which is most economists just follow what is going on. They work for a particular entity, and they just follow what's happening, and so that people are not taken by surprise. But it's very difficult in this environment to know what's happening. You're not sure whether it's quote noise or whether it's a trend. And we don't know whether we're in another continued recession right now or whether we're coming out of it.
That's jumping in a certain sense, if I may. That's jumping to where the politics of the moment are and so forth. But what I was trying to get at, in a sense, so it is with economics, because, and I'm wondering how we can look at that, because we have, as you mentioned, general theory. You had John Maynard Keynes, who in terms of the modern era, Roosevelt, or after the Depression of 1929 and after and leading up into the wartime years and the institutional structure of the world now was largely conceived, Bretton Woods and everything after the Second War, was largely the work of John Maynard Keynes, another giant.
Well, the Depression was not the work of John Maynard Keynes.
No. But that era.
Yeah, the crash was in 29. The Depression lasted all the way through until the Second World War. Yeah. Although we had some improvement in the 35, 36 period, and the things he was doing were done. Were working, and then they reversed it in 37.
But we've had then we could tick off a few names. We had Say's Law was there. You had Ricardo. You had Marshall.
Say was the chief economist for the French Revolution.
Didn't know that. Really? Yeah. Is that right?
Jean-Baptiste Say.
That's it.
Was the point he was making when he talked about Say's law, which was that supply creates its own demand. But he was basically saying that we don't need all these aristocrats to manage things. He was basically saying the economy will take care of itself. We don't need what the aristocrats were saying was
your liege lord.
You need us. In fact, in the case of the Navy, it was true.
Okay.
You know that in the Navy you had to have 4/4 of nobility to be an officer.
Is that right?
In the French Navy.
What does that mean, 4/4?
4/4. I mean, you have 2 grandparents on one side
Oh, I see.
and two on the other.
Oh, I see, I see.
So 4/4 nobility means all 4 of your grandparents had to be nobles.
And that's tied into the idea that that's the source of historical legitimacy, are the crowned heads. They came to call themselves the divine right of kings.
Well, it
so
keeps
that was
control.
called historical legitimacy.
Right, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
Anyway, so the point is, when one reason that Admiral Nelson won the Battle of Trafalgar is that the French had no trained officers.
Really?
Because they either fled or they were guillotined.
Yeah.
So that one of the things that happened with the French Revolution was that, in some ways, say was wrong. That you do need people who are able to run a country, who are trained, just the way you need them to run the Navy.
Right.
And that a revolution is a difficult thing to do, unless I mean that's what they were revolting against, is the lack of leaving a second tier, and one that leads right into Benjamin Strong's error. Benjamin Strong was the head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. He's the only one in the Federal Reserve System who seemed to have understood what Keynes basically put a theory to.
That's interesting.
Which is that you have to lean against the wind when you are running a central bank. He understood that, but he didn't leave anybody in charge when he died. Didn't leave anyone in charge. He died in 1928, if I remember correctly, a year before 29. So there was they had new people who didn't know what they were doing, and so they didn't know what to do when the crash hit. Yeah.
Well, we had a series of people that Ricardo, comparative advantage. So the discipline was emerging as we came into the Industrial Revolution, and things were changing and so forth. And then that had political context. But if we can go past, I don't know, Marshall and some of the others, but we get to the modern era, let's say this century or the century just passed, and we come down to where Lord Keynes was a huge figure in terms of setting up the context, which in these days, as we talk now, set up the institutional structure in terms of economic understanding that has largely been translated into institutions, and that were set up by his vision. In a sense, he was a major figure in terms of understanding the institutional structure that is now thought of as historically legitimate when it was connected to a political philosophy that was married to the economic theory that he had proposed. And on the other side, you might have had, you had Schumpeter in the Austrian school, and then it came out finally to be, you get Ludwig von Mises, and then you get Friedman and that kind of thing. But
von Mises. Von Mises was the founder of sort of the Austrian school in the United States.
And Schumpeter?
Schumpeter was on the. He's not viewed as in the direct line
of Austria
because you had Milton Friedman. That goes straight back to von Mises. And Friedrich von Hayek was the He was the connection.
Up from serfdom,
From von Mises to von Hayek with the road to serfdom. And then Milton Friedman sort of carried it on.
Chicago.
And in 1965, Time magazine had him on their cover.
They did.
And they quoted him as saying, "We are all Keynesians now."
Well, I think Mr. Nixon said that in 1972 too.
Well, he was quoting Friedman.
He was quoting Friedman in that quote. Okay, that's interesting.
And there's sort of some agreement that you do not. I mean, Milton Friedman's a book which he wrote with his wife,
Up from Freedom,
Anna, was his book showed his book for the work for which he won the Nobel Prize. The Nobel the Memorial Prize in honor of Alfred Nobel is actually the full title, since it was created by the Bank of
But
Sweden.
I'm
Bank
quick.
of Sweden.
I'm quick. Yeah, it was created by the bankers. It wasn't
Yeah.
created by the Nobel
No,
Committee
he
that
didn't
does
have
the others.
economics on his
It's
list.
just the bankers who do that. That's
Yeah.
set up,
Anyway.
and it was only since about '69.
Anyway,
or
it's
something.
still called the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, I know, but there is that
it's
distinction.
different from the other prizes.
Yes, indeed.
Milton Friedman and Milton and Anna Friedman basically showed that the that the central bank. Well, I remember I mentioned Benjamin Strong.
Yeah.
When he died, no one knew what they were doing, and they simply essentially made things worse by by deflating in a deflationary environment. And the point of this is that Keynes provided the theoretical basis for leaning against the wind. And that was very powerful, and it's still part of the Federal Reserve model that they have.
And the institutions that follow.
Yeah, I mean, the monetarists are essentially, the Friedmanite monetarists are essentially attacking pieces of the Keynesian model.
Yeah.
And you've still got the Phillips curve, the concept of the trade-off between inflation and unemployment. It's still deeply embedded in everybody's thinking. And it's how we think about the economy. That we are in a deflationary environment. We need to lean against it. Paul Krugman is sort of carrying the flag for this, and I believe that he is right. I believe that we had such a I mean, we should never have let things get to where they got
in 2008.
In the years leading up to 2008.
Yeah.
And it was a combination of laws that stripped away another thing we haven't mentioned, which is Glass-Steagall.
Glass-Steagall was when was that voted out? It was voted in back in the Depression time.
The date that people put on it is 1999 as sort of the end of Glass-Steagall, but actually there was a chipping away before, and there was continued chipping away regulation after, and there was sort of light regulatory oversight. Carter Glass was a Virginia senator, and he was hugely instrumental in the creation of the Federal Reserve way back in 1913, right? Same year as
income tax.
And they were trying to ensure stability, and then when they had the runs on the banks, they created the FDIC in 1933, and that was the work of Steagall. That was the Steagall part.
Okay,
so when people say that Glass-Steagall has been ended, it's not true. First of all, the Steagall part is all, we still have the FDIC, so that's not true.
That's true. Thank God.
Yeah, but thank God. And it was has been very well run. Sheila Bair did a very good job. But the problem is that the erosion of the Carter Glass wall between the
investment banking and commercial
which I
banking.
call the foxes in the chicken coop.
All the venture guys.
Yeah, the
they
venture
turned
guys
everything
are the
into
foxes. The foxes want to get into the chicken
hen coop.
The hen coop. They want to get into the whatever.
Yeah.
They want to get into those feathered creatures to get the eggs or to get the
and
chickens.
the chicken fat.
Or get the whole. The point is, we don't want to get too deeply involved in the coop side of this. The point is that the bank deposits are huge.
Yeah.
And investment bankers would love to get at some of that money in order to finance the investments.
Well,
and they also want to get it. One of the things they did in addition was to take huge bets and then cover their bets
with derivatives.
With insurance companies, basically through insurance companies, the credit default swaps.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to explain all this.
No, but I think it's worth keeping. It's worth keeping in mind. You wanted to separate Glass-Steagall, if I understand, as a layman, right? You wanted to separate risk. It's all dealing with the element of risk. for one thing, it seems
Right.
to me. Even the derivatives. I don't know how long those derivatives have been around and so forth, but I know Mr. Reagan said government is the problem, not the answer, and wanted to get away from any kind of government regulation, and so added thing that
Well,
went after.
derivatives have been around a long time because derivatives are either futures or options, or either one or the other.
I did a program with a woman who was the International Swaps and Derivatives Association
Yeah.
20 or 15 years
Yeah.
ago. She said it began with olive trees in
Right.
ancient Periclean Greece.
Right.
So that you don't know what the crop is going to be, or
Right.
currency
It's a
exchange.
future. The
Well,
future market.
it's a process of insurance against contingency happenings in terms of the context by which the contract's going to be fulfilled. It's insurance or something.
You want to, as a farmer, you want to know what you're going to get paid, and as a buyer, you want to know what you're going to pay.
Also, if you get $100 million contract for something, and then the currency rates change and so forth, you want to have some insurance against the unforeseeable events that are going to come up in historical terms. But it seems to me it's all in the private sector. We've had Lloyd's of London, have we not, for a long time, and we have a reinsuring capability of the overall system. And we're getting a little bit off bait, but it came out of the Glass-Steagall, and that was 1999. But is that getting away? The canon, then, in terms of there's a we started comparing B.F. Skinner to Rollo May in terms of any other. You get difference. You got John Maynard Keynes on one side. Is it Chicago on the other side, or
That's
is it
basically how people shorthand people use?
And that's what we're looking at in terms of
basically you have the monetarists, Chicago School, and the libertarians who are like Ron Paul,
Ron
who's a
Paul.
libertarian,
Yeah.
and his son.
Yeah.
They are libertarians, and they want to get rid of the Federal Reserve. An extreme form of this is to get rid of the Federal Reserve and replace it with a rule, some kind of.
They want something gold, or they want.
That's the very extreme form of the libertarians.
Would he be called? We used to call it a gold bug, or not?
Gold bugs, right?
Yeah, gold bugs. They want to. Mr. Nixon went off that in what, 71, 72?
Yeah, exactly. It was a Republican who actually went off the gold standard.
Why did he do that? What was his thinking? He did also price and wage controls and so forth too. Why did he do that? What is your
the
thinking?
IMF was supposed to take care of all that, and
Yeah.
the link to gold was made it possible for to turn everything over to the International Monetary Fund, and then rely on them to keep the currencies in line.
And they did.
And at that time, it didn't. At that time, remember that 1971, we had the oil crisis.
That's true.
You had inflation start.
Yeah, that's right.
And there was the whole decade was plagued by inflation. And at the end of the 70s, it looked as though there was nothing that one could do about inflation. And
then Mr. Volcker
came in.
Yeah.
It was actually appointed by Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Because it was way out of hand by the time, yeah.
But then Reagan said, I want you to really,
and he did.
Kill inflation.
Yeah.
And Volcker said, I know how to do that.
Yeah.
The Federal Reserve knows how to kill inflation. They just basically kill the economy.
Well, yeah, that's a problem when you kill the cat.
Interest rates went to 20%.
Yeah.
Overnight interest rates went to 20%. People were scrambling for money.
Yeah.
This was a liquidity crisis brought on by the head of the Federal Reserve, and he was very brave. He said he might not have done it if he knew how much misery he was going to cause. It was very short, though. It worked. It was. He's viewed as the consummate central banker. His reputation has been untouched by any of what's happened.
Yeah, at that
Whereas
time.
people are looking twice now at Alan Greenspan's.
Yeah, apparently they are. Yeah, they are.
But because he now looks as though he was too lax. Interest rates were low too long. He should have tried to raise them a little.
And he was an adherent.
Succeeded.
He was an adherent to Ayn Rand.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know if you should hold that against him.
Okay. That's interesting.
But he believed, although her views are not mainstream. It's still being a Randian goes with certain personality, I think.
Yeah, that's the thing. But so we got these institutions that have come in our formula, and we have a world that is organized along those lines. I wonder if I could bring up something and set me straight, because again, I don't know well the canon, the economics. I've read it as a layman in that. But I know that there was a letter. Lord Keynes wrote a letter to his grandchildren. Are you familiar with that? He wrote a letter to his grandchildren in their maturity, which would be about now. And essentially what he said in a letter to our grandchildren, and he said it essentially in that, he said that you're going to be confronted with something that is very hard to understand, but you're going to be confronted at that time with technologically induced massive unemployment. And the only way we have, in terms of the way you can view things, in terms of getting demand, Keynes was very interested in getting some demand. We had a problem of a lack of people being able to have money to clear the market. You got supply, you got demand. You got these two things that are always operative economically and so forth. And the people simply didn't have money to clear the market. So you have that kind of a thing. And he did that. And so he's in a sense saying that we're now in a situation where we have an economic situation that threatens many parts of the world and so forth. And do you think there's something to be said for, are we misinterpreting what he said? Or does it hold? Because we've always thought that even if you get a combine and put agricultural workers out of work, they'll be able to go to the assembly line with Mr. Ford, and you'll create more job opportunities. You can distribute demand to the masses of the people through wages, and that's the only way that people, by and large, are able to get income, giving them the ability to move into middle class and to clear the market of what can be produced. And we have a demand side problem in terms of the world economy now. But I wonder, can you address all of that, or is it too convoluted?
I'll just focus on this question of, do we have technological unemployment? Is that our problem? I think that that our unemployment problem is partly the replacement of people by machines. I mean,
structurally,
you can see these new factories that are competing with Asia. You can see they're hiring very few people.
Are they really? Okay.
I mean, that's what makes them viable. And the Germans are way ahead of trying to get, and the Japanese, ways of getting machines to do things that people used to do. But I think the reason we've been threatened is we've been selling so much to China. Buying so much from China.
Yeah, right.
They've been selling so much to us.
Yes.
And that they've been the way I think about it is that the jobs. Yeah. We've been letting our jobs go to China, and the reason that the Chinese have been able to do that is they've kept their renminbi.
Yeah, right.
The people's currency very low, very smart. The Chinese are extremely astute in how they've handled this. They've been buying up all these government assets, and that helps keep the interest rate low.
RT bills, yeah.
Well, they've been buying middle, notes longer term. Okay. And the thing is that the Chinese. That's where some of our debt has gone, and that Chinese debt is what's worrying a lot of people. Peter Bernstein, the late Peter Bernstein, used to say, "What does it matter how big our debt is if we owe it to ourselves?" Which used to be true.
Yeah, right.
And that was a valid point. Now the problem is we are owing it to other countries, and it's different. It's different because it creates instability. And having a lot of government debt overseas, as well as having this intermingling of the global economy because of all the investment bankers being global in their thinking.
Well, we do have an internet, we have containerization, all kinds of things that made the world different in a physical sense.
Exactly. And containerization is beautiful to see. It's also worrisome because if you look at how look at how porous our system is. You don't know what else is coming.
Well, we didn't have the ability to move, so it took 3 months to get from London to New York in Tom Jefferson's day, I think, you know. So, I mean, it's a whole different world, and it gives options to the people. The banks are sitting on a great deal of money, but if they can go and invest somewhere where they can make 300% more than they can do by trying to invest with all of our infrastructure and our social programs and so forth, it makes it difficult for them to go to sell that to the board of directors if they can do better in another place.
But now the fact that the Chinese have been selling us so much, replacing our manufacturers, you know, what we say is that the apparel jobs went from New York to New Jersey to North Carolina to Mexico and then to China.
That's right. That's about it.
Basically trying to maintain low wages because there's very little margin in the apparel business. It's a lot of competition. But saying that that has been a large source of our unemployment problems is not to deny that there's this technology, the need for new jobs to be created by technology is very great. And
new jobs created by
technology. Well, take a look at it. Think about it. You've got these new. Think of all the new things we have that are technologically that are innovations. I mean, all the Apple is talk about all the Apple innovations, and you see
indeed.
Right there.
However, I don't think you know that you need it. If you get I understand. But if you get an algorithm or something that can do what 500,000 people had to do, Lily Tomlin plugging one person in, you know, there are things that can be done through the inventiveness, and things can be done. Expert systems can be done where they can structurally not need people to produce great capability. But that means the only way we have, this seems to be in the minds of people, to distribute demand, that is buying power, to the people, is for them to have, we have capital assets that are really productive. The image of a combine comes to mind. You have a combine that moves across acres of fields and produces 50,000 barrels of grain without even a driver, and they're still going to try and distribute some of that productive capability through the driver. They don't even need a driver. They run it with a computer program. So the labor theory of value that has informed a lot of, we didn't get to Karl Marx before as somebody who's been there, you know, in the 19th century, and informs a lot of what is called the left and so forth. They were enthralled with the labor theory of value, and I wonder if that is something that informs adequately or appropriately political decision makers, or is it maybe something that ought to be questioned because it was good for allowing to get a minimum wage and maybe improve wages for people through labor organizations. But the capital instruments are increasingly responsible for production, and a lot of these high-tech companies, they have people. They don't need people in the numbers that they did during the Industrial Revolution.
You're raising so many issues here that one could spend an hour on many.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Trying to get a pattern.
That's right. Okay. Well, okay. I think that William Baumol said.
But he's a macroeconomist.
Yeah, William Baumol.
He's very smart. Yeah.
And said that the key to everything is labor productivity.
Okay.
Because quality of life depends on how much, you know. My quality of life depends in part on what you can produce.
Well, it doesn't do you any good to, if I can produce something, if you don't have the money to buy it.
Well, okay.
It's a supply and demand.
Right. I mean, but then, so your ability to sell what you produce depends on my ability to produce something that I can get paid for. So it's so we're all in this together. All right. But now, what I'm trying to get at here is when we talk about productivity, you're talking about the productivity of labor relative to land and relative to capital. There are three factors of production. Entrepreneurship, we can think of as skilled labor. Increasingly, we think of entrepreneurship as being teachable. So really, entrepreneurship is a form of skilled labor. So you've got land, labor, and capital. And when you talk about labor productivity, which is what he refers to, you're really talking about how much an individual can produce with per hour.
Yeah.
I guess it comes down
Well,
to because you don't want to have to work 15 hours a day to do a day's work. So you really want to get it down to per hour, so it leaves time for leisure. So you can, most economists in the 20th century, and Mason Gaffney is a guy who understands what I'm about to say because he's written about it.
Mason Gaffney.
Mason Gaffney out on the West Coast, Berkeley.
Young guy or?
No.
No, he's got some years. Okay, good.
But Mason Gaffney said that when he was at Harvard, he wanted to write about land speculation, because
Henry George.
Well, this is an issue that's of great concern to the Henry George School.
Yeah.
As you know, Henry George.
It's a proud tradition.
Ran for mayor and.
No, he had a lot of. He had Mark Twain, Tolstoy. He had a huge following intellectuals who were in opposition to the capitalists.
What he said, which is part of the point I'm about to make.
Yes, sir.
What he said is that economists who are doing two-factor studies, which is basically what they did, it was not considered, as Mason Gaffney puts it, respectable, dignified to spend much time on issues relating to land. Okay. One thing, that land is local.
Yeah.
It's the property tax is local.
Yeah.
And the federal government is concerned with labor. We have Bureau of Labor Statistics, Department of Labor, and capital, which is the Department of Commerce, the SEC.
Yeah.
So you have this the lack of interest in land as part of a factor of production, which is reasonable, which may have been reasonable during the era when land, when you were in a frontier, when you kept opening up.
We did have the.
It was expandable.
Yeah, we did have the Homestead Acts. Got some asset land ownership into the hands of the people, other than just their labor.
Exactly.
That's the point, I guess. Really, yeah.
Right, and so that you had the opening up of more land. It seemed to be a resource that wasn't important.
But they closed it down.
Well, that's right. We got to the West
Coast. We got
a
couple decades.
We got to the Golden Gate Bridge. We got to the Pacific Ocean.
And went back to the system where all the capital assets are owned by a tiny plutocratic class.
Well, I don't want to.
That's gilding the lily in terms of propagandistic language. But it's true everywhere in the world. It's a relatively small class that owns all the capital instruments that embody the capital
There's no question
instruments
that
of production.
Wealth is concentrated in this country as it is
everywhere.
And wealth is concentrated in.
And it's assumed the only way to get demand or money to people is for them to have a job on the estate of the people who own all the capital and don't talk about getting any ownership of the means of production other than your labor.
Right.
That's the question, and that's what has been used by the left in order to try and create jobs.
Marx's issue was
surplus labor.
Marx was concerned that you had to wait outside the factory gate to get a job, and that the control of the factory owner was the fact that he could point to the line of people unemployed outside. So
doesn't it hold now?
Unemployment doesn't bother some people, but it's not smart, because the unemployed are not contributing to the national wealth. It's a huge.
Well, they can't buy anything,
and they can't buy anything. Right.
So that's one thing that's going to be operative under any economic system. Is you're going to have supply. You're going to be able to create goods and services, and let's say good environmental conditions, and the other kinds of things of a well-run economy for the world. And you've got to have the ability of the people to participate in the production and value of those. And are those two things out of sync in a major systems kind of way now? That's the question I'm asking. Is there any point in trying to think about how?
Well, the answer is yes, of course. I mean, you only have to look at the high rate of unemployment.
Seems that way, and all they talk about.
And it's not just in this country. I just come back from Spain, where the teachers were protesting in the streets because there's thousands. I mean, it wasn't covered any in the news.
Well, Mr. Keynes warned in 1930 it's going to be it's not going to be a matter of political decision making or how you finance. It's going to be structural. That we're going to catch up. Our technological capability is going to, and education. You've now got things where you can have access to the best minds in the world through internet and so forth. It's getting to be where they can't go to a university. It's $60,000 tuition. It's crazy. Medical costs are going so out of sync with we have a tremendous capability to provide ecologically appropriate context for operating what Mr. Fuller, a comprehensive, what it called operating manual for Spaceship Earth.
Right.
But we don't have a context that allows us to do collectively what we're capable of in a living sense, as he called it, because we have outdated institutions from the past which are being reified, that are not relevant to a qualitatively transformed zeitgeist reality.
Well, see,
there's a
I
transformation
think that we need
place.
to separate out this country from Europe. In both Europe and the United States, the people at the wheel are arguing. I mean, there's a driver and there's somebody else who's arguing and has his hand on the wheel.
Yeah.
So the two parties are creating concerns about how this ship of state is being driven.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's
spaceship.
increasingly being done in a large context. So you bring in China, you bring in Malaysia, you bring in other and we're increasingly an interrelated world system.
But the thing is that the difference is, I think, in the United States, the situation is basically sound. And the problem is that because of all the uncertainty, you have a scaredy cat animal spirit. In other words, remember Keynes talked about the reason you need government because the investors, business class becomes scared. They become the animal that they should be compared to is a scaredy cat.
Yeah,
right?
Scaredy cat.
And so we're in a scaredy cat economy. Mm-hmm. And how do we get out of that? And I think President Obama's plan was perfectly good.
His jobs plan?
Well, his original, what they call, they don't use the word stimulus anymore, but the original idea of injecting a lot of money. Paul Krugman and Joe Stiglitz, Professor Stiglitz, both said that he wasn't big enough. He needed more.
Well, that's right. It could have been.
And see, nobody really understood. I think initially back 3 years ago when Lehman Brothers went down and
I remember. September 20, 2008.
Nobody understood.
Mr. Paulson had a three-page thing that he kneeled down in front of the Congress.
I don't think people fully understood at that time what they know now, which is how bad the situation was.
It was worse.
So if you've got all this period of chicanery that was going on, you need a huge. You have to expect a huge reaction. Mm-hmm. The higher they go, the harder they fall, and that's what's happened.
Okay, I wonder if it is. Okay, I wonder, is it possible to think in terms of economics? You put that politics. The world. I mentioned to you before. Actually, the Earth is within the universe, and it's all one system. It's all one, but we divide it down into things. And if you can get like what they call a systems understanding of things, which is coming as the knowledge and understanding is becoming more and more available to us. Just think, John, 20 years ago, we didn't know there existed neurotransmitters, the way the brain works. Mm-hmm. We now know. We now know with the genome, the things that are coming, the ability to get patterns of understanding things in a large context. We know now that 200,000 years ago is when our species appeared on this planet. And we get down to where we have a unique capability of extending consciousness in tools and technology, and that has consequences in making the environment other than in an Eden-like sense is a lot of most of the creatures. A major transformation that's occurring. And are we at a point maybe of some sort of a qualitative transformation? The suggestion of, among others, and there were a number of Buckminster Fuller and others with the design science, took the measure of things and began to get some sort of an understanding of what is the context, how many, the resources were all there to cavemen. It took application. That we're getting to a point where we're coming to a qualitative transformation. Maybe even not just within a historical context. James Joyce said history is a nightmare of injustice from which we're attempting to awaken. are we at a point where there's a qualitative transformation taking place, that we have institutions we've inherited out of history where the context, the overall context, the systems context, it's been altered at the level of capability from what was the case within the historical context right up to the recent past, and we don't have vision because we don't have people understanding things at a level other than the political institutions that the news reports and so forth, and the institutions.
I think
history, a qualitative transformation.
You can't ignore how the American spirit is revealed in politics. You can't just say that's irrelevant. I think that the Tea Party, the Tea Party is of interest in what response they're going to draw from the American people.
Well, okay.
I think that you're seeing the response. I think that there was a vacuum, and in stepped the Tea Party.
Well, there's angst.
Yeah.
Don't you think there's
right.
angst in the whole world now? There's something going on. Bobby
right.
Dylan says something's blowing in the wind.
Right.
There was
that was a while ago.
No, but okay, that was introducing us to an era.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it was a quality when it came time for the end of the feudal period, 1,000 years. Everybody had their idea of legitimacy. What are the realities? One of the premises that Mr. Fuller presented was: do you think, let me ask another thing. He did, the Admiralty, weapons. The thing that has led most of the political leaders against the wisdom school people who said, take care of everybody, let's take care of everybody, and everything, they ignored that, and they would get a weapon system that would give them an advantage over the tribe in the other village.
Right.
So they could have a weapon system, go and conquer them, steal their grain, become strong for their tribe. It's called realpolitik.
Right.
It still rules, does it not?
Well, I think,
it's still just whoever's got the gun.
But we're at the point where that doesn't make any sense.
Well, wait a minute. What's changed? It's been like that, Second World War.
Well, since we've got several countries that can blow up the world.
Wait a minute. Did you hear what you just said? In the Second World War, which I was alive, and I think maybe you were too as a young man or as a young infant or something, but I can remember we were trying as hard as we could at full tilt boogie, Willow Run, turn it out. We were trying to kill each other as best we possibly could, and you will note that we were impotent in terms of large-scale mass extinction.
Yeah.
Do you think we've crossed a major line on that tangent? Where the weapons we come 2001, out of physics, nuclear, teller, thermonuclear, biological, wave weapons, things like that give an advantage to the winner. And you want to be a winner. If you're the winner, you're above the law.
Well, that
in terms of, do you understand?
If you want to be very,
are the weapon species lethal?
If you want to be very,
there's modeling that shows they became species lethal about 1970. Does it still hold if it was the case?
If you want to be very pessimistic about the world, then the fact that nuclear and other weapons, other hugely lethal weapons are proliferating, is a reason for being very pessimistic about the future of the Earth.
The future of the species.
Of the species, right.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is, in these times, we did a program with Isaac Asimov, great polymath, thinking comprehensively, not narrow things, politics and so on. But he said, this is the defining generation in an evolutionary sense. There's a lot of modeling that shows that those weapons that are extended capability reached a point where if they were to be unleashed, unlike as recently as the Second World War, would wipe out the entire Homo sapien species. Do you think that was the case? In the modeling year that they come up for that, even 62 with the Cuban Missile, there would have been a few survivors.
I think we have enough weapons to wipe out a large portion of the human race.
Well, that's different. Obviously, we can do in civilization and all of that. Cuban Missile, we came close and so on. But the point is, there is modeling that shows that the weapons, do you think we've reached an existential point where those weapon systems and that extension of power based on weapons and power to extend power and everything, has reached a point where they are so lethal that it would wipe out the entire species, the results of that. There's a great deal of modeling that shows that has become the case. A new existential reality on the negative side of the evolutionary process highlighted or apexed by mankind. Well, what I'm trying to get at is that this is not your normal time. there's a break point or a historical break point that is not being taken into account comprehensively.
Well, I don't know how you take it into account. I think, I mean, what do you want, let's say, the president to do? You want him to scare everyone to death and say that he's worried that weapons being developed in Pakistan for example, have huge lethal capacity.
No.
I mean, what?
Well, that would be, we can intimidate them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if they do, now they do. Then there are others. Right? Yeah. We can. That's the point. Is that the question is that the case? Now they could get modeling. They got modeling for that. Then the other side would be: is there anything equally existentially significant on what would Fuller or some of the other Isaac Asimov, some of the comprehensive thinkers, the poets, not the that is equally existentially significant on what he would call the living side? One of the things he proposed is that we were gaining in terms of the percentage of the world population that could be seen to be haves on a have-not ratio with those who are have-nots, coming out of history where there was always far more have-nots than have. We were coming out of a condition of fundamental scarcity in terms of our relationship, and that we were gaining on the percentage by our knowledge, by our extension of it, and that we had new design, we had new capability. We were actually getting to a point where there were more haves at the level of capability. We got all the institutions we've inherited. We're getting at a level of capability to where there were more haves than have-nots at the level of, we were transcending material scarcity as an ontologic reality. If that would be the averse, both occurred apparently from the modeling around the year 1970. We've been wandering in the wilderness, still assuming the context, the overall context in which you say operating manual for spaceship, the overall comprehensive context of evolution and evolutionary terms.
I visited China in '81.
Okay.
I visited China in '86. At that time, more than 80% of the people in China, the workers in China, were planting rice. Only 20% of the workers were doing anything but living at a subsistence level. That has changed.
Well, there's still a billion people doing that in China.
What we have done is we have allowed them to earn a living. I mean, by working in factories, it's not pleasant for them. They have to travel usually to other places, and they don't have rights and all the kinds of issues about the rights of workers when they're away from their home where all their rights are centered. But just looking at China, that's a quarter of the population of the world, and we're now, the progress there has been so terrific. I mean, if we think globally, we have had to give up something in this country, but it's so much less. I mean, we've gained. I mean, in a way, I mean,
that's true.
It's a little one-sided to say we've given up something to allow the Chinese to make all these goods for us.
Since '72,
But they have, and that as a result of this far more important than any foreign aid. India, China, the fact that we've been able to buy things from them.
300 million people have been lifted out of dire. You still got a billion people living on $1 a day in China. You've still got, in the West particularly, you got human rights, you got things coming up. And the world is being confronted, and there's this question of whether or not there's something alternative that's happening in this time period. Is that something that's ipso facto absurd? We were talking about economics. One of the definitions of economics coming out of a history is the allocation of scarce resources. Do you think it's possible, if we think, it's coming exponential now? Every field is coming exponential. It's not just, it's like a quickening. It's coming exponential. The line's going like this now. And we are not picking up on that collectively. The intellectual community is not, because we're enthralled to outdated institutions that have come out of history. Everything was the reality was zero-sum. There's not enough. And the definition of economics is the allocation of scarce resources. If you said there's enough, everybody's starving, but it's at the level of capability. We're not tapping into the newfound capability, and that's the challenge of leadership, and the intellectuals are falling down on the job.
No starving in democracies. At least That's
well, that's because there are a few rich people
Yeah.
who've been able to make their tribe strong by being strong with all that. But I guess I shouldn't even try to bring it up, that we're living at a time of an awakening is called for on a large scale, and it calls for thinking that is the institutional structure is not being able to take it into account because we're enthralled to the past and institutions that are not able to handle the future. We have to relate to the future as much as the past, and we're mired in the historical context.
The response to the Tea Party challenge.
Well, that's the thing that's coming.
I'm hoping that there's a need here for something spiritual. Clearly, it's a religious motivation.
Yeah.
There's more than anything. If you look at the idea that these side issues. What's the matter with Kansas? That book.
Yeah, right.
You know, that their economic interests are not being served by the Republicans at all.
That's right.
But they have been serving sort of some feeling about that religion is not being given enough. Religious ideas that they believe in are not being given enough respect by the society.
Yeah, but that's a claim. That's a claim to ancient. We had to have creation stories to deal with our self-reflective conscience. We're now able to understand it scientifically. We can understand what's going on. We're waking up. We're doing that, and they're denying that. There's a big threat in this election coming up that they're going to deny the scientific process. They're going to go back to their understanding of the universe in terms of some particular God that served their interest, that set it all up and has an authority over these things that we've evolved. And we got to have a faith in the fact that we have an understanding, and we got to tune into the understanding.
I think essentially we have to. The response to the Tea Party is that science is not in conflict with religion. That is the message that the Democratic Party has to.
I think you're right. No, I think
you don't want to take a side here and say we're against religion. What you want to say is this is perfectly, because people are looking for spiritual.
We have to anchor to history. We have to anchor to history, but it might be we have to have somewhere where we're going to realize that in a materialistic argument, a political argument, it can be argued that there is a moment of qualitative transformation that is currently the case, and it would be able to answer some of these in the scientific way with understanding, critical thinking, and so forth, and not lose faith in that and go back to thinking about creation stories that aren't being.
I think the points that can be made are, first, that science and religion are not in conflict, that secular humanists are not against everyone else's religion, that science doesn't have to be secular. You can have people who can believe things. I mean, there's lots of examples.
Yeah, we got to all be in this together. And that's true. That is absolutely true.
I think that's I think that the Democratic Party has to show respect for religion.
Oh yeah. Okay. Right.
And of course, if it comes out of the Catholic, a lot of the Democrats were originally Irish Catholics, Polish Catholics.
Let's not go into Ireland. Let's not go into that. That's something we finally got that. So listen, John.
All right, good.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rant.
And
sorry.
I want to rename Harold Square Harold Square.
After I'm going to sign right on the line. Get that petition. We're going to name Harold Square Harold Chair. Right, I'm all for that. Thank you. Thank you very, very much for viewing. Sorry we got off on this rant. Really good. Thanks for the informed understanding of economics and so on. Your pleasure, John Tepper Marlin, Ph.D., Principal City Economist, and there's a long resume of work that he's doing, helping to post and everything. So thank you very much, John. Sure. Thank you very, very much.